2020 presidential election coverage starts now. This is a political news update. Some big events have happened. Particularly, Trump has tested positive for COVID-19, as this CNN article shows you, and we'll go through some articles about what's happening here. This is quite an important event. If you've been watching the markets, you'll see they've dropped like a knife on this news. They'll probably recover, but they're going to be much more, let's say, unstable, almost certainly, because every time there's any news that Trump is getting more ill or he's getting better, there's going to be a sort of an upheaval in the market now. And this is the reason that upheaval's there, is because the country is now faced with the prospect of having a sitting president if Trump wins in 2020, who is possibly extremely sick and may not survive the full term. And that's an incredibly important event. COVID-19 doesn't have necessarily very deleterious consequences on younger folk and stuff like that, though of course wear your mask and do all the right things, but particularly men over the age of 75 who are overweight. This is the target demographic that COVID-19 that you see all those sorts of sad mortality figures for in COVID-19. It's this particular demographic, and Trump has just crossed the Rubicon into that demographic. So we'll wait and see, but the news that's covering him is saying different things. So it says Trump's positive COVID-19 test throws the country into a fresh upheaval. And CNN says, President Donald Trump has had a fever since Friday morning after testing positive for coronavirus, according to a person familiar with this matter, a stunning development that threw a country already unnerved by a devastating health catastrophe and a turbulent political season into a fresh upheaval on Friday. Now, as a side note, just note that when you test positive for coronavirus, there is an error rate in that test, so that for every whatever it is, let's say 100 tests that are administered, you might have one false positive. Or two false positives. And that means that two people who are actually asymptomatic, or sorry, not even asymptomatic, they don't have coronavirus, they will be registered as having coronavirus because the test has an error inherent in it. So we don't know from just a test alone whether Donald Trump really has it. We can say with great confidence, probably about 98%, that he does have it. But you'll really know if he has it if he gets these major symptoms, which not all people who have it do. So it's a bit of a complex situation, but again, he's had his fever since Friday morning, so he's had this, symptoms, but the symptoms are a fever, and he's also tested positive for coronavirus. He could have, for example, potentially, some other illness which gave him a fever, which isn't coronavirus, but the most likely outcome is it is coronavirus. And Trump was taken to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center Friday afternoon and will remain there for several days, the White House said. He has been administered a dose of Regeneron and remains fatigued, according to a memorandum from his physician. So he remains fatigued. As of this afternoon, the president remains fatigued but in good spirits. He's being evaluated by a team of experts, and together we'll be making recommendations to the president and first lady in regards to next best steps, Navy Commander Dr. Sean Conley wrote. Now, I don't want to be, too dramatic here, but the fact is that the president did say that he had held back some of the news of how the spread of coronavirus was progressing in order to not panic the country. So what I can say is that, it is within the wheelhouse of this president and other presidents to tone down negative events so that the country remains stable. So when his doctor says that he's fatigued but in good spirits, he may be much better than that, or he may be much worse than that. He may be trying to, not panic anybody, any voters or anything. So that's what his doctor's saying, but it's up to you to make your mind up where he is. And, we'll see when he, maybe at the next debate or the next time he speaks on stage. But he's being evaluated by a team of experts, and together they'll be making recommendations. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows said earlier Friday that Trump was, quote, in good spirits, but was experiencing mild symptoms. Trump's fever remains consistent with the White House's earlier description of mild symptoms, said the person familiar with the matter. Quote, we have a president that's not only on the job, will remain on the job, and I'm optimistic he'll have a very quick and speedy recovery, Meadows said. The president announced his positive test on Twitter at nearly 1 a.m. ET on Friday. The stunning development, after months of debilitating losses, set against a badly mismanaged federal response overseen by a commander-in-chief who repeatedly downplayed the crisis, injected new turmoil into the country's leadership at a moment of deep national strain. In his announcement, Trump insisted, quote, we will get through this together. His wife, Melania Trump, who also tested positive, tweeted, that she was also experiencing, quote, mild symptoms and was overall feeling good. So we know that they both have mild symptoms to fever and fatigue as well. And so the FLOTUS, or the First Lady of the United States, is also now infected with COVID. But the optimistic outlook could hardly veil the pervading sense of destabilization setting in as the country struggles to emerge from a generation-defining crisis, just as the politics seems to deteriorate to new lows. Stock market futures tumbled. Inside the White House, aides described a sense of panic as they worked to determine who else in the senior levels of government may have contracted the disease. So if we go through U.S. futures markets, maybe there's a graph over here. There isn't one, but the Dow futures were down about 1.6%, S&P was down 1.7%, NASDAQ was down 2.3%, etc. And this title says U.S. futures and global markets rattled after Trump tests positive for coronavirus. Inside the White House, aides described a sense of panic as they worked to determine who else in the senior levels of government may have contracted the disease. Additional positive coronavirus tests quickly emerged. Senior White House aide Hope Hicks tested positive as well on Thursday, which was revealed hours before Trump's positive diagnosis. Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel received a positive test on Wednesday, and the RNC said Friday that Senator Mike Lee, a Utah Republican, and Notre Dame President John Jenkins both announced on Friday that they had tested positive for coronavirus. Both Lee and Jenkins were at the White House on Saturday when Trump announced his Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett. Barrett tested negative Friday after being diagnosed with coronavirus late this summer and recovering. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden tested negative on Friday after sharing a debate stage with Trump on Tuesday. Biden's campaign said Trump appeared tired over the course of Thursday, prior to testing positive for coronavirus, according to people who interacted with him, but was not displaying severe symptoms of the disease. Trump did not participate in a midday call on Friday about coronavirus support for seniors that was listed on his public schedule. Senator Lindsey Graham, the South Carolina Republican who acts as an informal advisor to the president, said he spoke to Trump on Friday morning. Quote, "The president was in good spirits," Graham said, adding that he asked about the Supreme Court hearings. Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said on Twitter that he spoke to Trump on Friday, describing him as being in good spirits, and saying that the two talked business about Trump's Supreme Court nominee. Full steam ahead, McConnell said of the nomination, rebutting any speculation that Trump's positive test could delay the confirmation process. Not long after, Lee announced his positive test result. A member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Lee had met with Barrett on Tuesday on Capitol Hill, and neither was wearing a mask. Senate Democrats urged Graham to delay Barrett's hearings. Quote, "When we do not know the full extent of the potential exposure stemming from the president's infection." Attended fundraiser Thursday and traveled with Hope Hicks. Following Trump's positive test, questions swirled over why the president proceeded with his schedule on Thursday, including flying to attend the fundraiser in New Jersey despite being in close contact with Hicks, who was known by a small group of aides to have tested positive on Thursday. Meadows conceded on Friday that people knew of her positive diagnosis before Marine One took off for the fundraiser. Some staffers, he said, were pulled from Marine One, raising further questions about why the trip proceeded, with the president coming into contact with numerous supporters at his Bedminster club. Quote, "I'm not going to get into the TikTok," Meadows said. Quote, "I can tell you, in terms of Hope Hicks, we discovered that right as the Marine One was taking off yesterday, we actually pulled off some people that had been traveling and in close contact. The reason why it was reported out, just frankly, is that we had already started to do contact tracing just prior to that event." White House operations deemed the New Jersey trip safe. White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany said Friday. A person who attended the fundraiser in New Jersey said the president seemed subdued when speaking to an indoor roundtable event and later to a group of supporters who gathered outside. The person said the assumption among attendees was that Trump was exhausted from recent campaign travel. Other people who interacted with Trump said his voice sounded hoarse, though the assumption before he tested positive was that it was because of his recent rallies. Trump falls squarely within the highest risk category for serious complications and has been guarded about revealing details about his health in the past. So the fact that he's in that highest risk category, and we know that he hasn't been candid about his details in the past, are two reasons that you should be concerned that the President of the United States currently has contracted quite a serious illness. Trump's roundtable occurred indoors with a group of 18 donors at a socially distanced table, Guests did not wear masks, but a person familiar with the matter said the attendees had been tested ahead of time. A separate larger event for about 250 donors was held outdoors, with the president speaking from behind the podium set in front of the club's main doors. Most guests at that event also did not wear masks. Meadow claimed that the White House acted quickly to inform the public of the president's diagnosis. As you know, last night, even in the early hours of this morning, the minute we got a confirmatory test on the president, we felt it was important to get the news out there and at that time, and so that's why we sent out a tweet late or early this morning, he said. Ivanka Trump, Jared Kushner, and Barron Trump test negative. A hurried effort was underway to trace people who had interacted with the president over the course of the past days, including cabinet secretaries and senior West Wing officials. An internal memo from the White House Correspondents Association Board to reporters said that there were, quote, 2 additional cases of COVID-19 at the White House. A journalist who was tested, quote, as part of today's in-house pool received a preliminary positive result, and a White House staffer who was sitting in the lower press area of the West Wing received a confirmed positive result on Friday morning. Meadows said that all the core White House staff had been tested in the wake of the president's positive result. Both Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, senior advisors to Trump, tested negative for coronavirus. Friday morning, the White House said, Barron Trump, the president's the president and First Lady's 14-year-old son, also tested negative, according to Stephanie Grisham and Melania Trump's chief of staff. Vice President Mike Pence's press secretary confirmed on Twitter Friday morning that Pence and his wife Karen had tested negative for COVID-19. Pence's doctor released a letter Friday afternoon saying that the vice president is not considered a close contact with any individuals who have tested positive for COVID, and he does not need to quarantine. But Meadows also tempered expectations, acknowledging more positive results from the White House aides were likely. I fully expect as the virus continues to go on, other people in the White House will have a positive test result, he said. The Republican National Committee said Friday that McDaniel, its chairwoman, received a positive test result on Wednesday. She has been at her home in Michigan since the weekend. The first couple's positive diagnosis has caused ripples of anxiety inside the West Wing and the White House executive residence, where the Trumps are currently isolating. Resident staff are nervous, a source familiar with the matter told CNN. Other staffers at the White House described deep concerns about potential contagion. One White House official said White House staff were instructed to max telework through other officials within the complex. Though other officials within the complex said that they were awaiting guidance as of 9 a.m. ET. Staff learned of the diagnosis through tweets and the media, administration officials said, but have received no internal notices about it, even from the public health standpoint. We're all sitting around wondering, okay, now what? An official told CNN. Election and world stage. In light of the president's positive test, Biden and his wife were tested on Friday, and the results were negative according to Biden's campaign. Biden tweeted Friday morning wishing the president and the First Lady a swift recovery. Quote, I hope this serves as a reminder. Wear a mask, keep social distance, and wash your hands, Biden said. Biden tweeted later Friday while announcing his negative result. Biden proceeded with his scheduled campaign stops on Friday, traveling to Michigan. Only hours before announcing his diagnosis, Trump told a virtual audience the pandemic was nearing an end. Quote, I just want to say that the end of the pandemic is in sight, and next year will be one of the greatest years in the history of our country, Trump said during pre-recorded remarks given to the Al Smith dinner convened virtually this year because of the outbreak. 4 hours later, the president's schedule for Friday, which had included a fundraiser in Washington and a campaign rally in Florida, was scrapped. It was the first indication of how this year's presidential race will be reshaped by surprise circumstances, this time about a month before Election Day. The Trump campaign said Friday afternoon that all of the president's previously announced campaign events were being shifted to virtual events or postponed. Any attempt to shift attention away from the pandemic in Trump's response, which has caused his poll numbers to plummet, now seems unlikely. Trump has repeatedly sought to downplay the pandemic. He told journalist Bob Woodward in February that he wanted to always play it down, contradicting his administration's own health experts, pleading with Americans to take the virus seriously. Even as some of his closest global allies, including Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, came down with the disease, Trump continued to downplay it and shrug off the notion that he could contract it himself. He has worn a mask very infrequently, and at Tuesday night's chaotic debate, he mocked Biden for wearing one so often. Instead of heeding recommendations about social distancing, Trump has convened large campaign rallies where his supporters stand shoulder to shoulder, often without masks, to hear him speak. Since the spring, Trump has pressured governors to allow businesses to reopen and has recently pressed for schools to allow in-person learning. He has railed against restrictions on indoor churches and lambasted Democratic governors who continue to uphold rules against large gatherings. Through it all, Trump has insisted that the extensive testing regimen at the White House would protect him from contracting the virus himself. Tonight, as an example, everyone's had a test, and you've had social distancing and all of the things you have to, he said during Tuesday's debate in explaining why masks weren't necessary in that setting. Most serious health threat in decades. Yet, the efforts of his staff to shield him from the virus clearly fell short. In a memo sent after midnight on Friday, the White House physician, Navy Commander Dr. Sean Conley, said Trump was well, though he didn't specify whether he was displaying symptoms. Quote, "They plan to remain at home within the White House during their convalescence," he wrote of the President and the First Lady. "The White House medical team and I will maintain a vigilant watch, and I appreciate the support provided by some of our country's greatest medical professionals and institutions," Connolly went on, without elaborating what assistance was being provided to the White House doctors. "The diagnosis amounts to the most serious known health threat to a sitting American president in decades, at least since President Ronald Reagan was non-fatally shot in 1981. So this is the most serious health threat in, almost 40 years. Okay, so yeah, this is a pretty major threat to the Republic and to, of course, Trump, but also to the election in terms of, what it does. Will this rally support for Trump? Will this have Trump's support fall off? We don't know. It's going to severely impact the election, though. Trump has also has not been particularly forthcoming with details of his physical health, including when he made a last-minute trip to Walter Reed National Medical Center last year. The White House said he was getting an early start on his physical exam, but declined to say what tests were performed at the facility. In a readout of his physical, Conley said that Trump was in very good health, but listed a height and weight that placed him in the obese category. He is also known to have a common form of heart disease. A temporary transition of power from the Commander-in-Chief to the Vice President is laid out in Section 3 of the 25th Amendment, a constitutional change brought on by the assassination of John F. Kennedy. It has been used periodically since, when presidents are required to go under anesthesia for medical procedures. There were no indications that Trump was preparing to use the 25th Amendment. Quote, "Rest assured, I expect the President to continue carrying out his duties without disruption while recovering, and I will keep you updated on any further developments," Conley wrote in his memo. If both Trump and Pence become unable to carry out their functions, the Presidential Succession Act designates the House Speaker as next in line. That's Nancy Pelosi. Asked in May whether the White House was making contingency plans to hand power to the Democrat House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany scoffed. Quote, "That's not even something we're addressing," she said. "We're keeping the President healthy. We're keeping the Vice President healthy, and they're healthy at this moment, and they'll continue to be." This story has been updated with additional developments. So that's the CNN article. I like that one because it was very well fleshed out, and it gives you kind of all the detail you need to know about what's going on in that case, whether you're somebody who's worried about what's going on in the stock market, or you're worried about, maybe you're a Republican who's worried about what's going to happen to the Republican vote, or you're a Democrat worried about what might happen in terms of a sympathy vote, or how that affects the election. Well, the CNN article does a great job of covering that. I also like this Washington Post article as well. So just briefly, I'm going to go through this one. And actually this one, let's just check this. So this one is pretty short. So live updates: Trump arrives at Walter Reed Hospital after testing positive for coronavirus. And you can see here that President Trump was transported to the Walter Reed National Military Center on Friday evening after announcing that he had tested positive for the deadly coronavirus. Trump is struggling with a low-grade fever, a cough, and nasal congestion, among other symptoms, said two officials familiar with his condition. So here it says a low-grade fever, a cough, and nasal congestion, which we didn't see in the other article, among other symptoms, said two officials familiar with his condition. So that's the Washington Post. And then we have the Wall Street Journal here. But just the first the first paragraph is good enough. Trump tests positive for coronavirus. Here's what happened next. Here's what we know about the president's infection and how it could scramble the last few weeks of the presidential campaign. Here it says President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump Both tested positive for COVID-19 and plan to remain at the White House as they recover. Here's what we know. How did President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump get infected with the new coronavirus? That isn't known, so that's the key point here, is that we don't know how they were infected. The president announced the coronavirus test results in the early hours of Friday. The news came hours after Mr. Trump confirmed that Hope Hicks, a top advisor who traveled with him earlier this week, had tested positive for the virus. So he could have got it, in theory, through Hope Hicks. He could have transmitted it to Hope Hicks. He could have got it from Melania Trump. Melania could have got it from Donald Trump. We don't know. People getting sick is always a sad thing. But hopefully you thought that was interesting and that was informative. And if you did, be sure to give this video a like, a subscribe, or a follow. And thanks so much for listening.